in the morning, European time, Northeast Asia, where it is heading. We have four distinguished speakers for it, and I think the actual political situation gives even more importance to this topic. We have the US elections, and we will discuss what consequences have these US elections for the peace work in East Asia. We will definitely discuss about the fight against nuclear weapons and the nuclear weapon-free zone. So I welcome the first speaker. It is the chair of Blue Banner and former Mongolian diplomat. Welcome, Jargalsaikhan Enkhsaikhan. The floor is to you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy that IPB is taking up and considering this issue, which is very important, not only for Northeast Asia, but globally as well, because the great powers are involved in that. I would like to start by talking briefly about my country itself. When people think or talk about Northeast Asia, they have in mind such countries as China, Japan, Russia, the two Koreas, and of course, the US as important stakeholder. Mongolia usually goes unannounced, though we are part of the Northeast Asian region. We became part of that region after the end of the Cold War, when we felt that our interests are much more linked, connected with Northeast Asian region. It doesn't mean that people don't know about Mongolia, but Mongolia is well known in history for the conquest of Attila the Hun, and later by Genghis Khan, that had established the largest land empire in human history, that included both Russia and China, and lasted nearly for 2 centuries, the empire, and provided protection to the Silk Road that connected Europe and Asia. That's enough about the history of Mongolia, just to let you know that it is a country with a proud history. Today, Mongolia has a population of 3.2 million. It's very small. And during the Genghis Khan's time, it was around 1 million anyhow. And the territory, which is as large as Western Europe, 3.2 million and a very large territory. In foreign relations, it follows the adage which says that duck is calm when the lake is calm, meaning that Mongolia is safer in Northeast Asian region if the region is stable and safe. That is why we try to play an active role in Northeast Asian policy. Just about the history briefly, why Mongolia became very active in nuclear issues. During the Cold War period, as Soviet ally, Mongolia hosted Soviet military bases. And at the height of a Sino-Soviet dispute in 1969, we ran the risk of becoming a battleground between 2 nuclear adversaries. That's why at the end of the Cold War, when we became a truly independent country, focusing not on the interests of other countries, but on our own interests, in 1992, it declared its territory a single-state nuclear weapon-free zone and worked hard with the 5 nuclear weapon states to have them recognized as such, that we have no nuclear weapons and we don't want nuclear weapons of other countries to be stationed in Mongolia. In 2012, the P5, after long negotiations, have signed a joint declaration whereby they have recognized Mongolia as a nuclear weapon-free zone status and pledged, they promised to Mongolia and to each other to respect that status and not to contribute in any way that would violate that status. This is very important. The P5 have agreed, promised to Mongolia, and have agreed among themselves that Mongolia will be neutral in that sense. A few words about Mongolia's comparative advantage. Compared to other states of the region, Mongolia has no territorial or border problems, disputes. It maintains good relations with all the states of the region, including, and it's very important, both Korean states. And at times, it brings together US and North Korean, as well as Japanese and North Korean representatives to discuss bilateral issues. We don't advertise in the press, but they come and they discuss those issues and they go quietly to their places and talk to them. By doing that, it has shown that Mongolia can play a role of an honest broker and or a provider of good offices. This is the conclusion that I would like to make at this stage. Northeast Asia, as we see it, the Cold War and the Korean War have not fully ended in Northeast Asia. There is still plenty of mistrust and animosity in the region, especially on and around the Korean Peninsula. Lack of a needed regional political mechanism, which is lacking, and Mongolia's good relations with all the states of the region led Mongolia in 2014 to launch a so-called Ulaanbaatar dialogue. It's a 1.5 track regional meeting to discuss soft security issues of mutual benefit to the region, including economic development, infrastructure development, climate change, and so on. Everything except for the hard security issues, meaning denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. These annual meetings of Ulaanbaatar Dialogue is becoming very, very popular, and representatives of the US, of North Korea, of South Korea take part in those meetings in their unofficial capacities. That is very important. And specific projects are already being discussed there, economic, ecological problems, and so on. At the civil society level, Blue Banner, this is Mongolian NGO that I am part of, is to promote the nuclear non-proliferation. So together with Northeast Asian Regional Network of GPAC, has in 2015 launched a Ulaanbaatar process. It's a process to provide space for civil society organizations of the region, including, of course, the representatives of the two Koreas and the US, to meet and freely exchange information and views on issues of common interest and of common concern, and try to make habit of dialogue, encourage greater confidence building, and contribute perhaps some suggestions that we can come up with to our governments or other authorities, meaning governments that track 1 or 1.5 processes. A constant issue on our agenda is the Korean Peninsula issue. This is very important. And we're currently working to have this year's second meeting of this year after the US elections, because much will depend the relations between North Korea and US, the two Korean countries, also based on the outcome, who will be the president of the United States. So at the end of this month, we will get together and exchange views and see what we can do. Maybe we'll start with some kind of a statement or something, and then what we can do later on. There, I think the NGOs that are represented, US NGOs that are represented in our Ulaanbaatar process can play a very important role. They have their representatives in North Korea as well. They focus on providing humanitarian assistance to the North Koreans. So they have the chance to go there and so on. And there, I think contribution would be very important. Blue Banner has recently undertaken a study on denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula and establishing a Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. And it confirmed that this approach should be closely linked. You cannot talk about Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone without denuclearizing a North Korean peninsula, or the other way around. Because if you just denuclearize Korean peninsula, that means there's Japanese issue there, then the Chinese, and so on and so forth. So it is very complicated issue. And Blue Banner concluded that a bold conceptual approach is needed to practically address the two issues together, and that this should start with the US and North Koreans to focus on their bilateral issues first, because other parties to the six-party talks are prepared to join, but the first one should be the North Koreans and the US. They should agree on two or three important issues. First is the issue of denuclearization of the peninsula, because US and North Korea have different views on that. Though they agreed in their joint statement, but it just says that they will focus on that. And they do not try to explain how they see this issue. Then the other issue is the question of non-nuclear deterrence, whether it is applicable or useful to have a non-nuclear deterrence. We cannot say that there cannot be a non-declarance, but non-nuclear declarance is very important. And then there's the issue of no first use pledge. These things are important to promote confidence in the region. And of course, Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone would require, as it is the case in similar cases, legally based security assurances from Russia, China, and the United States, addressed to two Koreas and to Japan. We should not forget. And we believe that Russia's and China's additional political role would be to reassure North Korea that the US assurance would be credible and sustainable, unlike in the Iranian deal. It should be based on a treaty, plus that the Russians and the Chinese would also say that they will support that. That is very, I think, important. Then furthermore, gradual sanctions relief as negotiations progress, and providing international, I would say, mini Marshall Plan to North Korea would encourage it to be more forthcoming. Why? Because since long-term possession of nuclear weapons would have diminishing returns for North Korea, politically and economically. The longer it is, it will be difficult for North Korea to pursue this policy. Such an approach, I would believe, would be a win-win outcome for all the stakeholders, the two Koreas, Russia, China, United States, and so on and so forth. There are a number of serious think tanks proposals on establishing a Northeastern nuclear weapon-free zone, about which my other colleague, Dr. Umebayashi, will be speaking. However, I would like to underline that such proposals are being discussed so far on an unofficial basis, on non-official levels. Mongolia believes that establishing such a zone is doable and has offered its readiness to work on an informal basis to see if and how this zone might be established. It is in such a positive spirit Blue Banner is working with peer Northeast Asian NGOs and think tanks directly and through Ulaanbaatar process. Finally, in September, as part of an international forum on One Korea, Blue Banner has co-sponsored an international policy forum, with the participation of expert and civil society representatives of Northeast Asia and of the United States. We always try to include United States because the United States has alliance relations with Japan and South Korea. So it is very important to include it. And at the end of that meeting, we have established a working group to raise awareness of the issue among the general public. People know more about North Korean and Korean issue, but not so much about the possibility of Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. About the Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone, its challenges and opportunities. We hope that International Peace Bureau, with its vast network and rich experience, would work with Blue Banner and other committed civil society organizations of the region to promote a joint search for a practical way to move the issue of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula and establishing a nuclear weapon-free zones. Your support and your advice is very, very important. Thank you for your attention.
Enkhsaikhan, thank you so much for this highly informative and impressive speech. Thank you to underline the important role Mongolia is playing in the fight for a nuclear weapon-free zone and to show us which steps are possible and helpful to get nearer to this important goal. I will give the floor now to the next speaker. He's coming from Korea. He's coming from the Institute of Reunification and Peace Policy in South Korea. He's a board member of IPB. Jun-Ki Lee, the floor is to you.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, I could not send out my talking point. Yes, very sorry. Yeah. It is very meaningful for IPB to discuss the Korean Peninsula issues and the Northeast Asian peace at its council meeting side events. The Korean peace process is in a stalemate, and a new president, a new administration will be launched in the United States. One more thing I want to say is that North Korean Workers' Party Congress is scheduled for January next year. The party Congress will be held for the first time after the dramatic progress and stalemate, a kind of roller coaster of the Korean peace process. Yeah, we need to pay attention to North Korea's message and actions. I think the answer to move Korean peace process forward again is already contained in the Panmunjom Declaration and the joint statement of the Singapore Summit in 2018. Yeah, I can share this. It's a joint statement of Singapore Summit, 2018. Can you see this slide?
Yes.
It's, yeah. It's, I want to emphasize these words and sentences. Security guarantees, complete denuclearization, the establishment of new U.S. DPRK relations, mutual confidence building can promote the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And the first is establishing new U.S. DPRK relations. Second, build a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. It is a very important point. Is that, in other words, it is the realistic way to activate the peace-building process for ending the Korean War and concluding a peace agreement, and the normalization of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and North Korea in parallel with the denuclearization of North Korea. The track of peace talks for peace on the Korean Peninsula should begin as soon as possible. This slide. Wait a minute. Yes, the problem is this is not order. Yeah, it's just I summarize the contents and the concept. Yeah, it's the in the Korean Peninsula issues. So the problem is whether the Biden administration will respect the Kim-Trump agreement. Of course, I do not deny that North Korea should not take provocative actions. And another problem is whether the new administration will accept a paced approach, a step-by-step approach that could not be agreed upon even under the Trump administration. This webinar's title is Northeast Asia, Where is it heading? The Korean Peninsula issues need to be addressed in the context of international politics in Northeast Asia or East Asia. The Korean Peninsula issue is the multi-layered composite of imperialism and colonialism, division and war, and the Cold War. After the Cold War, the Korean Peninsula has become a place where strategic interests between the United States and China intersect. The geopolitical struggle between the US and China from East Asia, the Middle East, to the east coast of Africa have had enormous impacts on international politics in East Asia. It can be predicted that the conflict between the US and China will continue under the Biden administration because the US-China rivalry have entered the stage of strategic competition. The Korean Peninsula issues, particularly North Korean nuclear problem, is often used by Japan as a pretext for enabling the country to wage war or for justifying the right-wing policies. These moves in Japan have generated a vicious cycle in which the gulf is widening over the unresolved historical issues in this region. The reality is that the cleavage of historical issues in Northeast Asia has caused distrust between countries and frequently resulted in arms race. That is why the denuclearization process and peace process on the Korean Peninsula can lead the dismantlement of the Cold War structure, in Northeast Asia, and will have to proliferate toward building up an international order of cooperation, peace, and coexistence in East Asia. We may call it transforming international relations in East Asia. In fact, we can confirm agreements on Northeast Asian multilateral security cooperation framework through historical statements originating from the six-party talks. It reflects the history and reality on the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia. To promote the process of peace and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and to spread the process throughout East Asia and Asia Pacific, I fully agree to bring forward the Northeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone initiative as a regional agenda. East Asia has meaningful foundations for Northeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone. For example, Japan's non-nuclear principles. 3 non-nuclear principles. Mongolia has successfully achieved the nuclear weapon-free status through the UN. In Asia, there are nuclear weapon prisons, such as Southeast Asian nuclear weapon prison and Central Asian nuclear weapon prison. The idea of the Middle East nuclear weapon prison, the Middle East nuclear weapon prison idea was proposed in 1995, and the first international conference on the idea was held at the UN headquarters in New York last year. The Northeast Asian nuclear weapon prison has been discussed at the non-governmental level in South Korea, Japan, Mongolia, and China. Sometimes in South Korea and Japan, it is also raised as an agenda on track 1.5. As far as I know, currently, wait a moment, a minute, yeah. Yeah, as far as I know, currently the Northeast Asian nuclear weapon prison idea has been raised in the context of creating a framework for multilateral security cooperation in Northeast Asia. For example, Morton Halperin, a political scientist and former Clinton administration's officials, yeah, and RECNA of Nagasaki University. In fact, it can be said that in South Korea, the Northeast Asian nuclear weapon prison idea has been discussed in such a context, namely the context of a framework for multilateral security cooperation system in Northeast Asia. I think the Northeast Asian nuclear weapon prison idea deserves serious consideration, particularly because it fits all the region's nuclear threats in an even-handed way. Simply speaking, from the viewpoint of the Korean peninsula, and frankly speaking, we can bind the US, China, Russia, and Japan to a multilateral treaty through the Northeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Prison Treaty. Yeah. And the Korean peninsula must be turned into a land of peace free from nuclear weapons and nuclear threats. Yeah. This sentence, Korean peninsula must be turned into a land of peace free from nuclear weapons and nuclear threats. This sentence agreed upon by two Koreas in Pyongyang in September 2018 cannot be realized only by denuclearizing North Korea. This goal can be achieved through radical changes to all security strategies reliant on nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence theory in Northeast Asia. Therefore, the US nuclear umbrella or extended deterrence on which South Korea and Japan rely, and the nuclear strategies of nuclear states, the US, China, Russia in this region should be treated as the agenda. Finally, I would like to emphasize that the Korean peace process means the process of actors from Northeast Asia and the international community answering the Korean questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jun Ki, for these interesting words and suggestions and ideas from the South Korean side. I think this was very, very helpful for promoting the whole process and for getting a broader understanding about the situation in the whole region and also about the chances we have for coming to a nuclear weapon-free zone in the region. Now I'm coming to two speakers from Japan. I think Japan is playing a very important role in the whole process and discussion. And I love to give first the floor to Hiromichi Umebayashi, an old friend of mine whom I met again by the preparation of this webinar. Umebayashi, the floor is to you. I'm very happy that you are still with us and joining our common fight. The floor is to you. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
You have to click the microphone button so that we can hear you.
No.
It should be on the bottom left.
No, it's great. Now please start.
Okay, sorry. Oh, thank you for your introduction. I want to speak on the theme from nuclear-free Korean Peninsula to a Northeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone. My organization, Peace Depot, is an NGO in Japan for research, information, and education on peace issues. It is a very small organization. We undertake a project since November 2018, Citizens Watch on the implementation of Korean Peninsula, Korean denuclearization agreement toward Northeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone. So I'm very much involved in the issue of this Northeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone. I want to explain two things on why the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, especially of the DPRK or North Korea, is so important, not only to the region of Northeast Asia, but also to the rest of the world. One is a possible nuclear proliferation domino. If the North Korean nuclear weapons are accepted as a fait accompli, the public opinion in Japan and the South Korea or ROK in favor of the nuclear armament in each country. And it will inevitably, the public opinion for such nuclear armament will grow in ROK and Japan. There are already core hawkish parliamentarians to act aggressively responding to those public opinions if they grow. So nuclear armament of Japan and ROK will happen, and it will then destroy the global scheme for non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. So second point I want to say is, in this situation, the North Korea continues to express its consistent willingness for nuclear disarmament under a certain condition. Before it entered the diplomatic process with the US and ROK in 2018, Kim Jong-un said like this: it would have no reason to keep nuclear weapons if the military threat to the North was eliminated and its security guaranteed. This statement is a very constant statement from the DPRK since the beginning of its first nuclear test. So these 2 points is very important to consider why we have to, we have to be we have to focus on the Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone issue. And I want to explain on the nuclear weapon-free zone in general. In the terminology of the international legal arrangement, a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty is a familiar and well-established legal system to simultaneously address denuclearization and security guarantees obligations among regional state parties. And this is the reason why Northeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone should be studied more, energetically, I should say. In case of Northeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone, I want to explain a simple scheme called 3+3, which was already explained by Junkyu, and which myself proposed in 1996 at an INESAP conference held in Gothenburg, where, if I remember correct, Reiner Braun was there. And the 3+3 arrangement, we assume a 6-party treaty. 3 non-nuclear states, DPRK, ROK, and Japan, will constitute a geographical nuclear-free zone, and surrounding 3 nuclear weapon states, US, Russia, and China, will provide security guarantees to nuclear weapon-free zone. We know DPRK is not a non-nuclear state anymore, but as I said, it still has willingness to be so under a certain condition. Of course, we can expand the idea to 4+3 arrangement by including Mongolia, if it's appropriate. As for the question, how we can realize such Northeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone, a so-called comprehensive approach has been developed by various researchers and institutions, including Morton Halperin, US scholar and former US President advisor, and Nautilus Institute, and RECNA, Nagasaki University Research Center for Nuclear Weapon Abolition. In the comprehensive approach, we will pursue simultaneous agreements on several key pending issues, such as end of Korean War, declaration of mutual non-hostility, termination of economic sanctions, and economic energy cooperation and assistance, and establishment of a permanent regional security council. Those key things are pursued simultaneously at the negotiation table. The ongoing process on Korean Peninsula, which is very promising and very much encouraged, is considered as a process toward a nuclear weapon-free Korean Peninsula. By the 2 Inter-Korean Declaration in 2018 and the US-DPRK Summit joint statement in Singapore, 3 nations, DPRK, ROK, and the US, agreed to a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula. In consequence, critical issues relating to Japan are left intact. Security assurances to the DPRK to be provided by the US will inevitably involve US forces in Japan. So Japan have to take position on that issue. Also, nuclear-free Korean Peninsula will not be stable unless it properly addresses possible nuclear armament of Japan. Therefore, the process has to involve Japan at some stage. Because of the failure of the US DPRK summit in Hanoi 2019, negotiations between US and DPRK are now locked in stalemate. But I want to emphasize the historic significance of the Singapore Point Joint Agreement between the US and DPRK. They agreed to two common goals and two well-balanced mutual commitment. Two goals mean to establish new US DPRK relations, new good relations, and to join efforts to build a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. And two mutually balanced commitments are stated in the joint statement, which was introduced by Junko, that reads, President Trump committed to provide security guarantee to the DPRK, and Chairman Kim Jong-un reaffirmed his firm and unwavering commitment to complete the nuclearization of Korean Peninsula. So lastly, I would like to say 4 points in relation to the future tasks to be done by US new administration and Japan. One, US should not repeat the failure in 2000 when Bush administration shattered the near success of the KEDO process, KEDO process, attained by the previous Clinton administration. US new administration, Biden administration should take over the Singapore joint statement as a basis for future negotiation. While we know Biden may hate the legacy of Trump, but it is a good legacy, but should be succeeded. Two, US needs to take the approach of phased and reciprocal implementation of the Singapore Agreement, which Trump administration failed to do. Three, government of Japan is under the strong public pressure to sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons as the only nuclear bombed nation in wartime. And the treaty entered into force in January next year. Logically, Japan needs to seek a security policy that does not rely on the US nuclear umbrella for Japan to sign the treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons, TPNW. A policy toward Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone will be a practical and realistic option in that direction. Four, Japan's proposal of a North Asia nuclear weapon-free zone will invigorate and strengthen the current peace process on the Korean Peninsula, which is now in a stalemate. And the scope will be expanded to Northeast Asia beyond Korean Peninsula. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Umebayashi, for this highly interesting analytic speech, for the suggestions you made how the process could be developed and how we can come nearer to the big goal or the great goal of the nuclear weapon-free zone in the whole area, and underlining the role of Japan in the whole process. I will give now the floor to our final speaker, Reiko Masato. She is speaking for Kentikyo. She's a member of the IPP board. And I'm very happy, Reiko, that you are again with us during all these interesting but stressful days. Reiko, the floor is to you.
Thank you, Reiner. And thank you for adding me at the speakers list, although I'm not anything like the expert on this issue. But I just focus on the role of the movement, the peace movement, in achieving peace and denuclearization of the Northeast Asia. And already a lot of the important things has been stated by Junkyu-san and Umebayashi-san. So I will not speak about those things, but mainly about the Japanese peace movement, the task of the Japanese peace movement. The present biggest problem that we have now is the United States, because of its rivalry and confrontation with China, is strengthening its military buildup, especially in the southern islands, including Okinawa. And you know about the building of a new base in Henoko. And also they are having more active maritime naval activities in the seas surrounding Japan. And also conducting the joint exercises with Japanese military and Korean military. And along with this, Japanese military, the self-defense forces, is also intensifying its build-up and building the new base, and also enlarging its base in these areas. So there's a lot of protest against such moves by the people, the residents of these candidate communities. And I think you already know that in Akita and Yamaguchi, the deployment of the Aegis Ashore have been canceled, partly because of the strong protest. And ever since the second Abe administration started, it has always taken a very hostile attitude against North Korea and also South Korea. And of course, the dialogue between North Korea and Japan has been suspended. And also we are seeing the suspension of the dialogue between North Korea and US, and also inter-Korean dialogues. So in this situation, the peace movement of Japan and Korea jointly trying to find a way to open the new dimension of this situation. And through this, in search of such way, in May last year, we had the joint Japan Korean Forum for the Peace of Northeast Asia in Seoul. And I think about 300 people took part. And from Japan, many organizations centering on Gensikyo, and also many peace organizations and labor and women organizations from the Korean side took part. And we have been very much encouraged by the more than 10 survivors of the Korean airborne victims also joined this forum.
Vandaag komen of kun je niet vandaag komen?
And the outcome document that we published, unfortunately, it has not been translated in English yet, I heard, but there have been many points proposed as the tasks, especially for the Japanese peace movement to tackle, which I want to introduce to you. And these points were also confirmed and discussed in the North Asian Special Forum on Northeast Asia Peace during the 2020 World Conference against ANH bombs that we had this summer online. So it is like the common awareness of the two peace movement. And one of them is that Japan, as its involvement, after its involvement in the Korean War, and also as the country which has Article 9 in the Constitution, should play the very positive role in achieving peace in this region. And the LDP government still claiming that the threat from North Korea is just working on creating the war waging country, working on the strengthening of the US bases. But we have to stop this kind of attitude to intensify the tension in this area. And we really need to stop the Japanese government's actually like the harassment kind of attitude toward the South Korean government. We are very ashamed of this. And as Mr. Umebayashi and Junkyu said, the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula is not limited to the denuclearization of the North Korea. We really need to achieve the Korean Peninsula without nuclear weapons or the threat of nuclear weapons. So for that purpose, both Japan and Korea should be freed from the nuclear umbrella of the United States. This we have to achieve. And also we have to help the victims of nuclear weapons, both in Japan and Korea. We have to give just compensation to them and support their life, especially because the victim of Korea, the Korean hibakusha, are doubly suffering from the colonial rule of Japan and the atomic bombing. So we seek for the state compensation to them, and also we support their demand for the apology and compensation from the United States government. And for the Japan and Korea movement to work together, we really need to achieve the correct understanding and the awareness of the issue at the grassroots level. For this kind of public information and education is very necessary, especially Japan, which started the war of aggression. So its history of and the crime should be learned by our people, and we have to promote education to prevent such interference and intervention to other countries again in the future. So the kind of public and the national people's debate and understanding should be deepened. And that's the way to prevent Japan going backwards to the era before the war. And although the relationship between Japan and South Korean governments are very cold now, but as the ally of the United States, they have one thing in common. Both are taking the opposite and opposing the abolition of nuclear weapons. And these are the only two countries voting against the UN resolution to promote the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was tabled in the United Nations just recently. And during that forum last year, so both movements agreed that working together, we have to make our own government to join and ratify this treaty. So that's the reason why we, Gensekyo, just started the new signature campaign to urge the Japanese government to sign and ratify the treaty. So following our effort for the International Hibakusha Appeal Signature Campaign. And according to the public opinion poll, 70% of the Japanese people support Japan's joining the TPNW. So on this new signature, launching this new signature campaign, we had a very broad range of people supporting this call. Not only the people of the peace movement, but the people in the cultural activities, academics, and in the entertainment industries. So we have been very much encouraged by the wide support. And Mr. Umebayashi kindly joined in the initial supporters on this appeal. So, and one thing that we want the IPB to do is to encourage this kind of people's effort to achieve the entry, to achieve the joining of the TPNW. And internationally, special effort and special call should be made to the people in the nuclear weapon states and their allies to work on their own governments to change their attitude to join this treaty. So I think that's yes, one more thing. There's one good episode that I want to share with you. Just recently, 17,000 face masks have been sent from the Korean A-bomb victims organization to Nihon Hidankyo. And but for sending so many masks, the Korean victims organizations did the big fundraising in the Korean among the citizens. So not only the victims themselves, but second generation Hibakusha in Korea, and people in the Buddhist field, and even among the people who were victimized in the military sexual slavery. They also joined the fundraising. And during that effort and campaign, they said that the Korean Hibakusha's existence and their activities were also known among the Korean society. That's what I've heard from the Hidankyo people, and which has been carried on the Hidankyo's newsletter. So that has been very heartwarming and very moving. So we learn also from the solidarity between the victims and get the inspiration from them, and we want to go on our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rieko. Thank you for remembering us to the victims of the bombing in Korea and in Japan. And thank you also for underlining the role of the peace movement in Japan and in the whole process. I think this is very, very important, above all for the work of IPB. And I think we should come back to this in our discussion we have now. So I open now the floor for questions and answers and comments. Either you show that you want to speak you write in the chat, or you raise your hand. I'm trying, with the support of my colleagues, see all your hands, and then we can start the discussion. Who wants to start? Cannot see any hand up to now.
We have a hand raised from Jenny Clegg.
Jenny, the floor is to you.
Thank you very much, Reiner, and thanks for those excellent talks. I found them extremely informative and very, very focused indeed. And it was very encouraging to hear the news from the movements in Korea and Japan. Just some points of it, some questions about information, really. I wonder if you could let us know, any of you could let us know what the state is with regard to the joint military exercises, because my understanding was that there was some accommodation that Trump agreed to downgrade the military exercises, and a kind of freeze paved the way for the Singapore Agreement. And it seems there might be room now for Biden to also reduce military exercises. So that's one question that I have. The other question is around the issue of no first use, which several speakers mentioned. It seems that an agreement on no first use between the nuclear weapon states would be a definite step in the right direction. And my understanding is that, my understanding is that North Korea actually has committed to no first use, so maybe I need to be corrected on that. China has a commitment to no first use. Obviously, the United States doesn't, but I believe that at some point Biden might have spoken about the possibility of no first use. And I also, I'm not sure about what the situation with Russia is, whether Russia is prepared to commit to no first use. So I'd very much appreciate more information on those two aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for the comment and also for the question.
We have another hand raised from Ariel.
Ariel, you raise the hand, and then maybe as Rieko or Enkhsaikhan or some of the other speakers want to answer the question. But first, Ariel, the floor is to you.
Yes, thank you very much to everyone. It's been very interesting and full of knowledge and wisdom in your comments. I would like to know how you are going to use TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in the region, and especially to mobilize the public opinion. And I have a special question on Mongolia, because the status of Mongolia in regards to this treaty is encouraging. They have voted the treaty in July 2017. Nevertheless, they didn't yet sign it or ratify it. So I would really like to know whether there is a chance that they use this as a lever to encourage the situation to move in the region. Thank you.
So, Enkhsaikhan, can I ask you to answer Ariel's question, maybe part of the first two questions? And then I would like to give the floor to Rieko to continue answering the question, and then we can continue. Enkhsaikhan, the floor is to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and I saw the hand of Umebayashi.
Okay. The first concerning Mongolia. Mongolia took part in negotiation of the treaty, in discussion and in adoption of the treaty. The second thing is that we have also become a co-sponsor of the General Assembly resolution on this issue. The question for us is to sign the treaty as soon as possible. And Blue Banner has been speaking with our foreign ministry, with our experts, and they're still in this process, because frankly speaking, for us, the priority today is fighting COVID. It's the government, the parliament, all the NGOs were trying to focus on that. And you know, our position that we have always been supportive of TPNW, it's just a matter of time. When we sign, either we sign or ratify. Ratification would come if we would take this issue after the 22nd of January. So this is the process. People know the importance, but we have our own priorities as well. The second question, did Jenny raise the question about joint military exercises? I'm not very well aware. I guess our colleagues from Japan or South Korea might be able to respond. No first use. I mentioned that this issue in my presentation because it is one of the important issues, because no first use opens the door for more comprehensive understanding of each other. This is very important. As I understand, as I think you have already said, that China has always said that they are against first use. They will, no problem in that sense. As I understand, the Russian position, it depends on the US position. And the US position is that they cannot do that because that will affect their military policy and their pledge to Japan and to South Korea. So that's where it's. So if the US moves, I don't think the Russians will be far behind. The US position is very important. For US, I think the question is the question of deterrence. If they say that they will not use nuclear weapons first, that might, they say that might affect their deterrence policy with regard to Japan, South Korea, even the NATO countries. So this is how I see it. So much depends on the policy of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the floor is Rieko. The floor is to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny, for the question. The military exercise, Japan-US military joint military exercise was just concluded on the 5th, and which started on the 26th of October. So, which was mainly conducted in the sea area and air. So it's still on, and the recently deployed Ospreys, which are very dangerous and very defective aircraft. These transport aircraft has been deployed even in Yokota Air Base and used in many different bases with a lot of noise. So during this joint military exercise, they even conducted the exercise for the landing operation, and also the kind of exercise to I think to kill the head of the state. Of course, it's about North Korea. So this kind of very aggressive kind of exercise is still going on. I think about the Korean-US joint exercise, maybe Junki-san can speak more about.
Thank you, Rieko. I give the floor now to Umebayashi. He raised his hand. Please, the floor is to you.
Yes, I want to respond to the question of US-ROK military joint exercise. I understand the scale down of such exercise continues, and there is no such exercise with scenario, I mean the war scenario. the exercise goes to a tactical exercises, and one scenario is divided into several, small tactical things, and such kind of small scale exercise continue. That is my understanding. Maybe Junkyu can add more. I also want to respond to the no first use policy of the DPRK. Its declaratory policy, its official policy is they keep the strict no first use policy. It is declared, stated, clearly stated. But the definition of the no first use is not clear in every case. I mean, even in the case of the US and other nuclear weapon states, the no first use definition is not clear. In case of DPRK, Kim Jong-un says it will strike the US by nuclear weapons if they are ready to launch the missile. So if North Korea feels it's an imminent attack, then it will attack by nuclear weapons. So in that case, that may be the first use. But the official declaratory policy is no first use. That's the DPRK's position.
Thank you. Excuse. Yes. Thank you. Maybe I'll give shortly the floor to Yum-Kyu. You want to add something from the South Korean side about maybe to the exercises, but also to the first use policy? Please, Yum-Kyu, the floor is to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Your questions. Yeah, it's the first joint military action, joint military exercise is as Umebayashi and Masato pointed out, is continuing the small scale and downgrading. And additionally, yes, the South Korean government participated in the RIMPAC this year. So it's one of the, this is North Korea's arguments is one of the U.S. hostile toward North Korea is the aggressive joint aggressive U.S. South Korea joint military exercise. Yeah. So the argument is stop the joint military action. So thus our movement in South Korea, the peace movement, is not just suspending the joint military action, not just downgrading, but we have to stop the joint military action, the U.S. South Korea joint military action. It's regarding the U.S. South Korea joint military action. Trump's logic is right. Yeah, the U.S. South Korea joint military action is too expensive and useless. Yeah, his mention is right. I think so. Yeah, and TPNW is TPNW movement. Regarding TPNW movement, it's actually in South Korea. TPNW movement is not so strong, not so wide, not so broad. But is some NGOs in South Korea launched the TPNW movement this year. For example, SPARCS and KCTU, Korean Confederation of Trade Unions. Yeah, and especially as Asato pointed out, yeah, this point is Korean Atomic Bomb Survivors Association, Korean Hibakushas Association have a strong interest in the TPNW movement. It's not just because of North Korean nuclear problem, but they have to prohibit the nuclear weapons. Yeah, they think nuclear weapon should be prohibited. Yeah, so their thinking in this is they're very enthusiastic. Yeah, it's I hope that the TPNW movement in South Korea will be developed. Yeah, and it's no post use. Yeah, no post use. Yeah, sorry, no post use is North Korea declared officially no post use. Yeah, it's I think the meaning of no post use policy is especially in the process of Northeast Asian nuclear weapon free zone idea is no post use is very important between nuclear weapon states. It's between the U.S. and China, between the China and Russia. Is I think so. Yes, it's this way. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rikyu. And so I cannot see further questions and comments. Okay, when this is correct, I would like to give the floor to Lisa. Lisa, can you hear me? For some final words. Lisa? Okay, I can see that.
It doesn't appear that she's with us right now.
Okay, so she maybe is not with us. Then I will summarize 2-3 points. First of all, I think this was a brilliant webinar, and we definitely should continue having these webinars also about the region. I think we will have further development with the new US president, and we have to see what the new government of the United States will do in this region.
Sorry, Reiner, we have one more question. Do we have time?
We have one more. Okay. Yeah, sure. Who is it?
So this is from Mashid Zek. She wrote it into our chat, and she just asks, do they mean a peace treaty for general matters of peace, or a private agreement for Koreas between them in the presence of US, Japan, and other countries in the region?
So for answering this question, I would like to give the floor to Enkhsaikhan. Enkhsaikhan, can you try to answer this question? You can see the question in the chat. Oh, unmute yourself, please.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Paraphrase the question. I think it's about peace treaty.
Yes.
Right. And the question is?
Sorry, the question, it's in the chat, and it's, do they, I assume you guys, mean a peace treaty for general matters of peace, or some private agreement for the Koreas between them in the presence of US, Japan, and other countries?
Well, as I understand, the peace treaty is to end the state of war and normalize relations between, let's say, US and North Korea, and US and South Korea and North Korea. This is a peace treaty that's normalizing relations, no more thing. It's not a private one. I think it should be, if they conclude such a treaty, it should be ratified by all the parties to the treaty, including US Congress, and that's how it should go. And as I understand, this is the issue, one of the issues that is always hanging over, and nobody wants to take up this question.
Yeah.
Because before signing a peace treaty, there is the question of ending of the state of war.
Yeah.
What would that mean? So this is where the US and others have some issues to address first. So before peace treaty, it should be the end of hostilities, end of arms.
Yes.
That's how it is.
I think we should get treaty under international law. Yunkyo.
Yes, I mentioned the peace treaty, yeah, and the peace agreement, and as Enkhsaikhan's explained, is the peace treaty is basically ending the Korean War and ending the armistice system, armistice state of the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula is now the armistice system, yeah, armistice agreement system. Yeah, the war is not finished. Yeah, officially. Yeah, officially. Yeah. So we ending the Korean to end the Korean War system. We need the peace treaty, yeah, or peace agreement. Yeah, so there's basically three countries should participate in the treaty. It's DPRK, North Korea, and ROK, South Korea, and the US. The US is the main actors in the Korean War, and plus China. China supported the DPRK in the Korean War militarily. Yeah, and China fighted with North Korea. Yeah, fighted with It's in the Korean War. It's a main actor. China is. My opinion is China have to participate in the peace treaty. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this was a good answer to the question, and I think this explained a lot how difficult the situation is when we really have in mind that we are in reality in a situation where the war have never ended, and we need something like end of the war agreement and a peace treaty between the two Koreans, including the United States and maybe also China. So, my conclusions are that we should continue these kind of webinars. I think we raise very interesting questions, and maybe we should continue it when we know a little bit better and more in detail the policy of the new US government in the region, in the whole region, how they want to work with China. I think we have to have in mind that the confrontation politics with China will never be over during the next years. Then we have to see how the politics of the new Japanese government will work in the region, and also to see how will be the development of the two Koreans, how independent they can work together. Could they develop some steps in the direction I would call a policy of common security and more dialogue and agreement? So I think we are facing quite interesting times in the beginning of the next year. So we also should discuss it in IPB. I'm very happy that IPB had this webinar, and I would like to thank all the 4 speakers for their brilliant speeches and introductions and very helpful support for the event. And at the end, I can only say good evening, good night, have a nice day. And some of you I will see, I think, again in 30 minutes. So thank you so much, and see you again in the beginning of the next year. Bye-bye and all the best.
Thank you.
Bye.